My guest is a highly sought after professional photographer in Nashville, Tennessee. She's with me today because she's also the author of a new young adult dark fantasy novel. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Page One, the award-winning show for writers with the reader in mind.
That draws the reader along, just like fiction.
Here's your host and producer, Zita Christian.
Welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian, and my guest is Laurel Black. Laurel, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Zita. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I have to say, uh, your book, Lost Kingdom, kept me up at night. And it has been a long, long time since a book has done that. And generally speaking, I never considered myself a fan of YA fantasy. But I know that the whole concept of the audience of YA, especially after the popularity of the Harry Potter books, all of that has expanded. So I want to get your take first on looking at the genre as a whole. What do you see as a what is YA fantasy these days, and who do you see as the readership for your book, which has a little darker element in YA fantasy?
I would say my definition of YA fantasy is just fantasy that's aimed at a teenage audience. And to do that, I would say the characters are anywhere from maybe 15 to 19 in the book. I think that's a good range for the characters for YA fantasy. My characters are 17 years old. So that makes it a perfect fit for YA fantasy. And the readership I see for my book, though, I didn't just aim it for young adult readers because I'm older and I love YA fantasy. I've read it for years. And so it's really for anybody, I would say 13 plus, who likes this type of genre. It's not limited just to a young audience.
That's a good point that you're talking about the idea of you're an adult and you enjoy reading YA fantasy, and now I can say that I am a fan also.
Yay.
There's so much I found about the book that I could relate, not the specifics of the magic, but the idea of when I was a kid, things that I thought about and things that, ways I wish the world would be. And I think what this kind of ties into what I want to talk about in terms of the themes of your book, because there are themes in your book that you could put in any adult novel in any genre and explore them. So they are universal. And I think that that's what is one of the many things that makes your book so popular. I want to talk a little bit about those right now. Other readers might see additional themes, but what spoke to me as I was reading it and thinking of a even contemporary application, themes of power, and that's power shared with someone, but there's also a very strong theme of power over.
Mm.
Also, trust and friendship and love, because there's the makings of a relationship in there, and betrayal, which is a theme that surprised me in some of the ways that it unfolded in the story. When you started writing the book, when you're laying out the concept, do you think consciously, I'm going to explore themes of love and betrayal and friendship and power, or do you just writing the story and the themes come organically and you recognize them later?
It's definitely the latter. I feel like the story comes to me, it comes to me in different scenes. So I have multiple notebooks where I write down and brainstorm different ideas, and I'll think of one scene, maybe it's at the end, and then I'll think of one scene that maybe it's something at the beginning, and I brainstorm all this. So the themes do come up later. My focus more is on tension. So I think, what would create a lot of tension? And I think I get strong themes through focusing on the creation of tension because power and betrayal and love, tension, I mean, those are all just tension in the novel between the characters, between good and evil, things like that. And I think from that focus on tension, I mean, it starts in my outline when I'm writing. I write, what is the tension in this scene? And I think that carries the reader forward. And I think that also creates the strong themes throughout that I'll look back, like you said, and say, okay, here are the themes that I'm kind of picking out from this. But it was not intentional going into it.
Okay, now that brings up, oh gosh, how long does this go back? 20 years, 30 years? The late Dwight V. Swain, and I think he taught at the University of Oklahoma. He wrote a book called Techniques of the Selling Writer. And I started writing in the 80s. And for many of us, I mean, we just considered that was the book. If you're writing fiction, you need that book. And he talked about writing in scene and sequel, with the scene being, really, really breaking it down, the goal, the conflict, the disaster, and the sequel, the emotion, the quandary, the decision, and the action. And how that is all played out creates the tension and determines the pace. So, Laurel, one of the things I noticed in reading your book was how you write in scene and sequel. And that's something that the late Dwight V. Swain talked about in his book, Techniques of the Selling Writer, where the scene has a goal, a conflict, a disaster. The sequel has an emotion, a quandary, a decision, an action. And I find many times writers who write instinctively, they follow that pattern, not even realizing it. What I find is it sets up the book for a movie because it creates a scene that can be captured in one unit, which makes it so easy, or much easier anyway, to transfer it to screenplay. Have you ever thought about your movie being made your book being made into a movie?
I'm glad you asked that
Yes.
because I actually wrote it like a movie. Like I saw it as I was writing it as a movie in my head. And I created the scenes and the scenery and the landscapes and the kingdoms as if I was going to turn this into a movie. So it's interesting that you made that connection because that was definitely something I was thinking when I was doing it. And it would, in my opinion, translate really well to the screen.
I think it would as well. I noticed too that you have there are physical elements in the book. I noticed uh, there's a map, there's a stone, there's a key, which, well, the key itself is not, or I didn't pick up on it in this book, but I did pick up the whole concept of the bird. So there's a key with a bird on it, and I'm thinking, okay, the key's going to show up later, like it's a trilogy, so I get that. There's also a tattoo, and I'm wondering, do you have a tattoo?
I do not. I am.
I
Got
don't either yet, but I
yes,
read your book and I'm
yes.
thinking, oh, I gotta rethink that because I love the idea.
I kind of
Uh,
want to get one too. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get a big key.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, that works. Um, eh, Fantasy novels, there's a reader expectation in all genres, and I think in romance, the reader is looking for a hopeful ending that somehow falls under the definition of happy. And then, like mystery, it's like, you want to solve whatever the crime is. And with fantasy, there's always that idea of good triumphs over evil. What do you see as the evil in your story?
In my story, it is a very classic evil, I would say, kind of like Lord of the Rings. There's good, which are the hobbits and the elves, and then there's evil, which is the orcs and Sauron and all those things. So I kind of have that really strong good versus evil. But I also think of there's outer evil like that, and then there's inner evil, which I would define as like inner demons or inner struggles, like what the character is going through where they're struggling, what are they battling on the inside? So they're battling on the outside and then battling on the inside as well. So I definitely have that bad guy, that classic bad guy, the group of people that are chasing them and trying to kill them and trying to keep them preventing them from reaching their goals and all those things. But there's also the inner struggles, which I consider to be part of that evil, part of that tension as well.
I agree. I think it works so well to help set up. Well, you obviously you can see the outer conflict, but then looking at evil from the inside, you see the inner conflict within the characters and within the relationships. And speaking of the relationship, there's there's a growing romance in or certainly the potential for a romance in as this book grows. And as a romance novelist, I had a certain expectation of how that would maybe not tie up as a whole, but how it would develop. When I got to the end of the book, it's a satisfying ending, but it does not end on the classic happily ever after. And when I got to that point, I sat back and I thought, oh, of course, it can't get all wrapped up so fast. So talk to me about how you determined the ending, and I don't mean to give anything away in the story, but how you had to contrive it so that it would hold for a whole trilogy.
I think when you have a trilogy, you definitely want to leave people, in my case, somewhat satisfied, but still wanting more. Like I've read certain trilogies before where the author either wraps everything up in a nice little bow at the beginning of the book, and then you don't want to read the second book, or they end at a complete cliffhanger, which I don't like that either. But I mean, unless their second book is readily available, I can go and get it and finish the story. So I tried to wrap it up, as you said, in kind of like a satisfying way, but leave plot lines open, leave some of these struggles open and the conflict open so that the reader wants to move forward to the second book.
Sure. In Lost Kingdom, you have you have very interesting characters that I can see you take their main character traits and put them in a contemporary novel, and it would work just as well. I'm always curious, though, from the perspective of a writer, because many of the people who listen to and watch Page One, they are writers. My curiosity is when you're creating the characters, and you mentioned having several notebooks, I figure you might have them for each character. Did the traits they ended up with, were they there at the beginning, or did they morph and change as as you were working through the novel?
For most of the characters, they did stay consistent throughout writes and writing and rewriting. But one of my main characters, Raven, actually, the first draft, she wasn't very headstrong as she is in the
Oh,
final book that you're reading. So I wrote the first draft and then I wrote the synopsis of the book. And I was going through the synopsis and I was like, Raven doesn't have a lot going on for her. Like, she's not really going after any goals. She's just kind of tagging along with Jadak. And she wasn't that kind of powerful woman that I wanted to write. She was more like a damsel in distress character. And I was like,
mhm.
that's not how I see her, but that's kind of how I ended up writing her. So for her, I thought, I want to make her a little more headstrong, more willful, things like that, that kind of brought her personality and edge out a little bit more than her just kind of going along with the plot the whole time. So she did change, definitely from the first draft that I did of the book.
That's so interesting. As a female reader, I want to read about the character who has valor, not virtue. It's like I look at Gone with the Wind. If I wanted to, if I wanted to adopt or feel that I had characteristics of Scarlett O'Hara or Melanie, no, not Melanie, definitely don't want to be Melanie. I would want the strong woman characteristics, the I can survive, I can, do whatever it takes. Um, it, the whole concept of of valor, that I could face whatever life's struggles are. So I think that was a wise, wise move on your part. And you mentioned, I mean, her name Raven, you mentioned Jedak, the hero in the story, the other protagonist. Where did their names come from? And also the name of the what I think of as another very major character, Ka. So where did the names come from?
That's a good question. For Raven, I remember this was years ago. I was writing another book that never got published. I was writing a dystopian novel. And I woke up one morning, I'd finished the novel, I'd written maybe the second draft of it. So I was pretty well immersed in it. And I woke up one morning and I put my feet on the floor and an idea came to me. And the idea was there's a girl, her name is Raven, and she can turn into a bird. And that was where the idea of Lost Kingdom started. And I thought, well, I can't go with that idea because I'm writing this other book. But eventually I was like, the idea kept building and kept staying with me in my mind. So I thought, okay, maybe I should get another notebook and I should start brainstorming this other book. And that's what became Lost Kingdom. So her name came from that very first thought of Lost Kingdom. For the other characters, I think what I do, I'm thinking back, is in my notebooks, I jot down different names that I think might fit them. I get inspired by movies or other books. But what I want is something, I know this sounds strange, I want it to look right. Like it's got to have the right vowels in it. Like I didn't want Jedak's name to have an I in it or an O in it. Like those didn't feel like grounding and they didn't feel like the type of letters I wanted in the name. I know that sounds weird, but it has to look right on the page. And sometimes when I go through my own novel, if I have to read it out loud, I haven't even said some of the names out loud, which is funny. I just like the way they look. I like the consonants and the vowels in them and how they kind of fit in with each tribe that the person belongs to, like the bird tribe, they have bird names, and the bear tribe, they have more names that, again, that are grounding, that are strong names, things like that.
And I also see, like, for instance, Ka, the name of a bear. As soon as I first read that, I thought, oh, Kodiak. I mean, it was just there's an association that is in, could be in the reader's mind that maybe isn't what you intended, but there's an association that immediately I picture, a large bear. I want to go back though to something you just mentioned about how you visualize things. You're a professional photographer
Yep.
and you have to see things with eyes that the average person doesn't have. So I know your training is as a mechanical engineer, and I wonder how the mechanical engineer and the photographer and the writer all work together, but particularly focusing on what you see through the eyes of the photographer, how you look at the scenes, how you look at the scenery, how you look at the physical characteristics of the characters you're creating, how you're looking at their body language. How does your skill as a photographer, because you photograph people, how did that help you for writing the book?
I'm going to talk about engineering first because you brought that
Okay.
up. So I have a degree in mechanical engineering. And I think for me, for engineering, you learn how to learn things. So I didn't have any formal training in writing. But what I learned was how to reverse engineer a book. So I read over the years, I've read a lot of young adult novels, a lot of books that I like, and I learned, what makes this book good? What makes it something I want? And through my engineering brain, I was kind of able to reverse engineer that for my own book and bring it into my own writing. The photography is another element that is really helpful. I think the photography element for me, like the photography that I do, a lot of it I have to envision the photograph. Like I do product photography as well as shooting people. And with product photography, you have to set the scene, you have to buy props, you have to do a lot of work before you actually take the photo. And with me, I have a very strong sense of visualization. I can see things in my head. In product photography, I can see the shot in my head and I move things around in my mind until it clicks, until it feels right. And I use that skill for this book as well. I would see a scene in my mind and I would literally just move the characters around in my mind. Or what if they did this? Or what if they look like this? Or what if their body language was like this? I would move them around in my mind until I had this intuitive feeling that it felt right, like it clicked into place. And so having those engineering skills and the photography skills were actually quite helpful, especially since I'm not formally trained as a writer.
Yeah, I would say it definitely was helpful. The end result is phenomenal. I want to skip gears here just for a minute. I want to focus on how you launched this book. You created a massive like online street team to get the word out, to get people to review your book, to read it, to review it, to talk about it. How did you do that?
That's a good question. I ended up reaching out to probably hundreds of people. And these are bloggers, YouTubers, bookstagrammers, book talkers, podcasters, all types of people that, again, talk about books in my genre. And there are a lot of them. And I reached out to many, many of them. And I got a lot of rejection. I got a lot of rejection along the way. And if you're going to get yeses, you're going to have to get a lot of no's to get those
Mhm.
yeses. So all I did was create an Excel spreadsheet and started making a list of these different categories of people, bloggers and YouTubers. And I looked at their work. I didn't just like mass email everybody. I read their stuff. I looked at their Instagram. I connected with them. I sent them a personal email. I introduced myself. I didn't just send out these mass spammy emails. Like I wanted people to know, like, I care about your stuff and I love what you're doing. And so that took time. When I finished the book, I gave myself 5, 6 months to do this, to reach out to people, to create this street team, to send out the advanced reader copies. So that took all of the 5 months to do. And it was an extensive process, but people had a great response to the book and it was fun to interact with them. And I kind of feel like some of them became my friends through that process.
That's interesting because that speaks of reverse engineering. You're looking at, okay, at a certain point, I want to launch this book, then backing it up 5 or 6 months to say I need to get people talking about it. So that I can see more and more how when you talk about the whole process, whether it's the writing or the launching, I can see that mechanical engineering mind doing that reverse engineering. I think that's brilliant. Um, That also meant you had to send out a lot of ARCs, or were they electronic?
I did both. So I put together a package, a little box of goodies where I included the book and some little gifts and the map and things like that. And I would send it to people in the US. But people abroad, I sent one book, physical book to Canada, and it required so much effort to get through customs and fill out the customs form and all of that that I said, no more, I'm not sending any more internationally. So those people internationally all got digital copies, and a lot of the people in the US got physical ARC copies, but some of them got digital copies as well.
That's an important thing to think about when you're looking at getting your book into the world. That whole idea of getting your book in the world was your responsibility because you made a choice to publish the book yourself, which is what I think more people than ever are doing now because there's so many tools and opportunities that make that possible. One of the challenges of doing that is editing. I know, not personally, but I've heard of some people who will just write the book and put it out. They don't edit. Some don't even revise, and they're proud of it. I don't think that's a good thing. I know that you hired an editor to go through the book, and I'm wondering for advice for other writers who are, writing a book and looking to launch it, put it out there into the world. Could you talk a little about the value of hiring a professional editor?
I think it was absolutely essential. Lost Kingdom would not be what it is today without a professional editor. I started out with beta readers. After the first draft, I got about 4 beta readers. And what I did with beta readers was I asked people that I knew would give me honest opinions, and that was super helpful because you don't want to ask your family or a friend that's just going to tell you, "Oh, it's great. It's so great." You don't want that. You want them picking it apart, you want getting feedback, and that's what a professional editor does as well, but they also have the skills and the training to really dive in and help you make the book the best it can be. So that is advice that I would give to any writer who's considering not hiring an editor. I would say that would be a big mistake. I'm kind of cringing on the inside. And it is an expensive thing to do, especially when you're an indie author. It is pricey to do that, but it's also essential. I mean, you can write something and you can publish it without editing, but it's unlikely it's going to take off or have people talking about it or really make the impact that you want to make with your book. Like your writing deserves that professional edit to get out into the world and be the best it can be.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. So the logical question then is, what did you as a writer learn from having an editor on your first book and reader reviews, comments from friends? What did you learn that you say, okay, this is the thing I'm going to work on for for the next book? I remember for me, I had issues with transitions, and I needed to work on those and get better at that before I got into the second book. What did you find was something that you'll look at and go, I'm going to do this differently the second time around?
My editor called me out on interiority. She kept saying, I kept wanting her to chop things out, like take this out, but she kept saying, add more interiority, because I was very plot focused in the beginning. Like the characters just did what they did and the plot moved forward, and I liked it to move very quickly. And she kept reminding me, like, the reader wants to know why the character takes the action that they take. If the character just takes an action without really exploring why they're taking that action or giving the reader any sort of sense of what's behind that action, they're kind of like robots and they're very hard for the reader to connect to. So, really digging into the interiority of the characters, really digging into the emotional responses of the characters. Again, when you're very action and plot focused, like I was, the deep emotions of the characters, which the readers love to connect to, they really can't because they're not there. So, those are things I'm definitely going to pay more attention to as I write the first draft of the second novel is the interiority, why they're doing what they're doing, and digging into those emotions.
I can then offer you the best tool that I gained dealing with that exactly is the book I referred to earlier, the late Dwight V. Swain, that book, Techniques of the Selling Writer. What you referred to as the interiority is what he called the sequel. And he said, if you can break the sequel down into this, just following the scene, you have the character's emotion, the quandary, like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Is this good? Is this bad? And then the decision that is made, and then the action, which sets up the goal for the next scene. So when it's parsed out in such Burgoan detail, it's easy then to recognize the pattern. You might find the book helpful. Mine is so highlighted with so much yellow, the pages all, well, they all look like lemons on the inside. My gosh, Laurel, there was so much interesting information here, so much more that I want to talk with you about. So if it's okay with you, let's make this part one of talking with you about Lost Kingdom. Are you up for that?
Absolutely. I would love to continue the conversation.
Good. Thank you so very, very much, because I just don't want to cut any of this short. So, viewers, make sure that you stay tuned for part two of this page one, talking with Laurel Black about her book, Lost Kingdom.